Welcome to the Brother Ill Show. Do some mic check. Mic check. All right. All right. We here. We on point. Let me know what y'all think about this take or this report coming from Promethean Action on Twitter or X, excuse me. And I think um, these good folks here, they do a good job at delivering a different angle on the state of affairs with the respect to the U.S. Um, current administration, the agenda, both domestic and if nonetheless, I think it's just an interesting take, um, and it kind of gets you in the space of man, I don't know what's going on, even when you know or have a good feel on the realities, um, on the current realities based on the events. So even if you got a good take on things, I think they still provide, um, again, just a different angle and a lot of good insight, both related to the history, the origin points of the countries and nations, and the various regimes and administrations, and forms of government and active roles in its or in their relationship, um, with America. Um, and I love different angles of light, to kind of give us a full plate here for our decision making matrix. Um, but if you locked in, as we know, if we locked in to just, one way of thinking or, um, just one media, then you got this obvious imbalancement. Um, and it's, could be tough, again, when it comes to the decision making process. Um, so we like to do some research and move around and, continue to keep our ears open, um, and our eyes open to the, ongoing events that impact us as individuals, as families, um, as communities, as businesses, etc. So it's incumbent on, the citizenry, the populations, the demographics to, um, discern through the propaganda, because that's exactly what is, um, at an all-time high, propaganda, and with the element of fear surrounding, censorship, being censored, being devalued, demonetized, etc. And the impact of that on people's reality, it shifts narratives, it impacts narratives, it affects how, um, the truth is presented. Um, so you have this work that, you know the global population has to do, um, because without the ability to receive communications, timely, and communications that's factual and fact driven, um, information, which allows people to make certain adjustments in real time, whether it's, financial, whether it's business structure, whether it's, um, a number of things. Work, how does it affect my workplace? Um, these decisions made by governments, the representative governments across the world, in their various forms, again, impacts people, individuals, groups, communities, nations. It impacts people. When we look at the statements from President Trump in reference to actions that he will take um, against another nation if they don't bend to the will or agree to the terms that he's putting forth, you know, they act on these timelines and make decisions that impact people in like the worst way, also in a great way. So, the incentive is there um, to lock in and to be, in tune with, again, relevant information that impacts people. You, me, those 1,000 miles away. It impacts people, real people, women and children. Should I say children, women and men, um, families? It impacts people in a real way. I've just seen a report where, you know, it's alleged that the U.S. government blew up a university in Tehran. Here I am. I am a father of a student athlete. I'm a former college athlete. And, one of the most exciting realities is to be, um, and goals, objectives is to continue that path of ensuring our children have a chance to experience the college life as a student athlete. And I can never imagine, a bomb, a missile, right, blowing up a university. So it's just, you know, even with the allegations of 170 children being murdered over in a school in Tehran, or people being murdered from missiles and military actions, children and women and in West Asia and on the streets of America. Um, so whether it's the streets of America, Detroit, Pontiac, Flint, Saginaw, California, Indiana, Ohio, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that's an issue that warrants the attention of the population, of the populace. What are we doing? What have we done? How did we get here? And excuse me. And what is the pathway forward on the recalibration, the restoration of not only the communities of America, but the communities of the world from this, from the impact, the devastative, or the devastation, or the devastating impact um, generated from the decisions that others have made representing nations, the representative governments, and it's obviously important, beyond important, that I know they say voting don't work, but I'm opposed to that because it's more than voting. It's about the participation from the citizenry and that level of activity, that active engagement brings about a certain balance of power. And for the normal or the average citizen, you know, um, the collectiveness is not, it's not a game. That's power. It weighs. It holds up. And time and time again, when the people was put up under that sword and forced to, you know, having to make a different decision other than complaints and sideline complaining, but the active role of getting engaged, getting in the game. That's where we at in 2026. You know, whether it's podcasters or door knockers or phone callers or community center people, essential workers, moms and dads, sons and daughters, etc. You know, the religious sectors. It's like all hands on deck. And, we have a duty and rights to be active in our role at enforcing the law. This thing boils back down to the enforcement of the Constitution, the understanding of it, the framework, its organic functions. Where did it even come from? What kind of a thought process? What's the spirit? What's the undying principles that are universally applicable in our Constitution? Americans, unfortunately, has lost that light, that consciousness of defending that Constitution, their Constitution. Without it, you don't have a documented framework. You don't have a country. You don't have no borders. You're not even authorized to be on American soil or the soil, the ancient soil, the holy lands, now referenced or referred to as North America or the Americas, represented by the United States in this particular territory. But, America has lost its light and it's regaining it. It's being redeemed currently as we speak. But it's overall has lost its light to, excuse me, to remember its duty. Its duty to itself, to its fellow countrymen and countrywomen, to his family, to his creator, to the planet. We lost sight of that. Become this barbaric, cold, dry entity. An entity. And it's unfortunate because one of my family members said yesterday that, this 2026, man, y'all still on that? And that's an interesting statement because that's exactly how the majority of us feel. Y'all still on that? We beyond that. It's a different time and era. And again, I speak to you, people in the world that feel that way because, you know, obviously it's your time to step up and take the mantle. Because it's people like us that have that mentality, that thought process that can bring real peace, both domestically and throughout the world. Because being driven by war and destruction is just not in alignment with planet Earth mandates. The Earth itself has a mandate. That's why we was given the order to take care of the planet, to replenish, to do good by it, by Mother Nature, not cause, havoc, heathenism, war raging, invaderisms, right? There's this thing about it, if somebody, forced their way into your house or come into your house, it's burglary, it's home invasion, and it's still that, even on the pretense that because you have the means to do it, it's still illegal, and the law still must be enforced very, very important for Americans to overstand that your first priority is to enforce the law. Because without it, you know, you could be thrown back in slavery. In reality, you know, you don't know your rights, you can't enforce them. And if you don't know your rights, then you don't know when your rights are being under attack. And so the consciousness is not there. So the actions to protect, to defend, to preserve is not there. So now you have a certain condition rendered upon you and your family and your country. And before you know it, you look up and you're in a situation like today, where no matter where you at in the world, you got some people that's been installed by people that don't represent you. And it's unfortunate. And it's been this way as we can, probably as far back as we can remember. But they talk about World War I and World War II agreements, which established a lot of these new posts still being manned by those who were put into place. I mean, by those who you don't see, but have set up these governments across the world, from from monarchs to this form, that form, and its various forms. And it appears that on the surface level, it's like, okay, you know, they're sovereign. They're not sovereign. They're not sovereign. There's probably not even no such thing as sovereignty at this point. Because why would I say that? They're all actors. They're all put in place, around a certain particular time period, and those posts have been maintained. And we find more and more in this out, far as the general public's concerned, under the Trump administration, because all of the garbage that's been going on, in that you get certain truths. So you get up on the podium, you hear President Trump doing a press conference with him and his team, Marco Rubio, etc. You hear about all of these agreements that were made post World War II and World War I, create these world orders. And that's what we've been looking at. These world orders that's been put together post world wars. And now you got this new era driven by this new administration that took a look at those agreements. Said, well, we need to get out of that. It's been 50 years. Their nation is doing great. Our nation is in decline. And again, great pitch, because it was the facts. We didn't build everybody to the point to where they're militarily able to compete. They're economically able to compete. They're able to impact the United States and its people. So you're like, well, that's a matter of concern. We need to re-examine, reevaluate, reassess these contracts that we have undertaken during World War II or post World War II to maintain global stability, right? And international law, whatever that means. And it's pretty cool. I respect international law when international law is being respected, but it's hard for me to respect so-called what they refer to as international law when the constitutional law is not being respected from inside the nations that's participating and pushing international law. When we open up and we look inside the scope of the nation, they're not honoring their constitutional law, the framework that legitimizes them as a nation. So, you want me to respect you saying, you know, this is a violation of international law, the rule of law, has been, theater at best. We got to address some things, but then the interior of the nations, how are these people, you know, again, you start to look at this thing and say, man, my man's been in office for 30 years. He's been the king, and they ain't even got kings. They got elections. And his son now, he's the ruler. You start to talk to people around the world. Why, what made you come to America? And they give you their story. And it's interesting because we're on this side of the aisle, but it's interesting. And you start to think in logic and common sense. You're like, man, you know, as a free man, as a free Moorish American man, you know, freedom means something to me. I just can't imagine being ruled or so-called supposedly being ruled, by some so-called king or dictator, etc. It's not popular sovereignty. I'm sovereign. I'm a sovereign king myself. I'm acting in my own interests, right? And I'm making decisions that are in my interests. Have borders, have a means to defend, have a security mechanism, have an agenda, an economic agenda. I mean, there's things, for you to be put restrictions, is actually a fiction. It's like, you got to have a driver's license, do you? You got to have a license to fish. Really? What is this? What have we, what have we, we got to, what is that? Tax generating revenue program. Somebody thought was a brilliant idea to tax the American people to get access to their own resources to exercise, a right that can't be taxed nor put licenses on. So, a person would have to not know or be aware of his or her constitutional secure rights or inherent rights, and or they might just be willing to participate in allegedly supporting the local original government with this fee, with this so-called fee, as if the people have some kind of feudal lord that presides and reigns over the people. It's again, if nothing else, is interesting. So that's my little spiel here to give you a little bit of a feel of Brother L, um, and the Brother L show. Very interesting host and a very interesting platform here. Uncensored, obviously, um, but from a neutral position. No right, no left, just the middle ground, right? The middle lane. Conservative, of course. Um, when you talk about, the term socialist, I wouldn't say I'm a socialist. I would say that I take care of my community first. I think based on the Moorish American curriculum, our Holy Koran of the Moorish Science Temple of America, and honors to our Prophet Noble Drew Ali, the founder of the Moorish Science Temple of America in 1913 AD for the uplifting of fallen humanity, restoring a nation via its nationality, its free national name, and our principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, which guides our conviction. And honors to our divine constitution and bylaws, honors to the Moorish America flag, five-pointed flag, the red flag with the five-pointed green star in the center, and the flag of the United States of America, the old glory. again, um, with that being said, you know, this is the so-called, for lack of a better term, the conscious community. We've been in observation mode. We've been watching. We've been studying the behaviors of humanity with respect to each other. And it's, again, if nothing else, it's interesting. You know, the lion eats the lamb, and actually the lion and lamb is supposed to lie down in yonder hills, and neither would be harmed when morning came. So we got to look at, why are we harming the lamb? Because to harm the lamb is to harm myself. We harming each other. So how do we get a point of peace and stability? Because you can't have stability without. Remember the saying, the Hungarian president stated that strong men make peace, weak men make war. Well, here we are, right? Where does that statement stand now, right? Yeah, well, peace through strength, peace through love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. But peace through love. And so the world is tired, it's beat up. Of course, it's resilient. Of course, it can endure, but it's tired. The people are tired to waking up to bombs, to waking up to news of missiles and this and that. It's been continued friction, high level, since the so called pandemic. So it's been continued friction since the so called pandemic. So after the pandemic, you had post pandemic draconian laws, fake laws pushed on the people. You had all kind of legislative acts or legislative pieces passed. That's against. It's really attacking the Constitution. You got the Russia Ukraine now. You got this. You got that. Now you got the people are attacked. You got domestic issues. You got all kind of you know crap happening. Acts of violence. You got trying to rebalance and fix our financial issues. You're trying to grow the economy. People busting their butts off in every kind of way, shape, and form. America is grinding, but America is tired of all the BS from everybody. Half the stuff, half of the pressure that's created on the backs of everyday American is due to people making decisions that we're not able to weigh in on. Meaning we didn't sign up for that. We didn't agree to that. And what gives you the authority to tell me it's going to be okay? Take one for the team type of attitude. This is a nation that respects and protects consent. Without my consent, you raping me. You just forced intercourse. What are we doing? What are we talking about here? We got to get beyond that. This is normal. It's not normal. It's not normal at all. Okay, you know what's normal? Constitution is normal. Constitution is normal. Understanding your constitution that protects your fundamental birthrights, your birthrights is normal. Allowing somebody or people, groups of people, very small groups, to take over land and resources and governmental seats is just not normal. It's wild, actually. As we say now, it's wild, crazy, wild. To have leaders, political leaders, that are unaware of the curriculum of the Constitution is crazy wild. But again, you know, welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Brother Ill Show. Make sure you check out our partners at Burrs Court, Debt Relief, Risk Strategies, Risk Management, asset management firm, one of the best in all of Michigan, the great state of Michigan. Make sure you check them out at berscorp.com. That's BERSCORP.com. That's BERSCORP.com. Now let's get into some Promethean action. Again, let me know what you think in the comments. But I think they give an excellent, different view. Give me some coffee. I mean, this picture by itself is interesting.
Establishment's Atlantic Magazine put it in their own terms with this headline: America is now a rogue superpower. Now, they mean that as a condemnation. We take it as a compliment, because what they call going rogue, we call liberation. But CNN ran a poll this week that said Trump's approval rating on the economy hits a new low. Well, of course they did. When you can't argue with physical reality, you argue with feelings. They want you in the role of the anxious consumer, not the informed citizen. Because an anxious consumer doesn't understand that Donald Trump is liberating us from a very evil system. Here's what they won't tell you. The British free trade system was never just economic policy. It was a weapon of imperial control, the mechanism that stripped our manufacturing base, killed our middle class, and turned a nation of producers into dependent consumers. I'm Susan Kokinda. I've watched the deliberate dismantling of America's industrial economy for 50 years. And that's why I know what Trump is doing is revolutionary, and why I need you to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons so that we can reach more people and stay in touch in this vital fight. Here's what I'm going to cover today. First, the state of Trump's economic revolution 1 year after Liberation Day. Second, what going rogue really means strategically. And third, the new diplomatic architecture which is rising in the place of the old imperial order, from Moscow to Beijing to Cairo to Washington. So 1 year ago this week, President Trump liberated the United States from what the White House called the illusion of free trade. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio put it more precisely at the Munich summit recently.
Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence.
That's the confession the empire didn't want on record. Because if deindustrialization was a conscious choice, then rebuilding it is also a conscious choice. And that's exactly what you're watching. 2 days before the jobs report, Donald Trump's special trade advisor, Peter Navarro, was pointing to new manufacturing data, which shows new orders up, production rising, and supplier deliveries surging. And then Navarro made a critical point that all of this matters because manufacturing does not fake strength for long. When orders rise and production follows, the signal is real. You can only run a factory so long on sentiment. At some point, steel gets cut, machines get turned on, and goods start moving. Now, the White House Liberation Day statement filled out the picture. Our trade deficits are down with China by over 30% and with the EU by over 40%. But here's what those deficit numbers actually mean on the ground. Our industrial production index is now at the highest since 2019. The United States has surpassed Japan in crude steel production last year for the first time since 1999. And manufacturing productivity has had the biggest annual increase in nearly 2 decades. Then, the day after the anniversary of Liberation Day, those jobs numbers landed. And here's one of the panelists making a point that matters the most.
I think one of the things this tells us is that employers believe that the situation in the Middle East is temporary and they're planning for the future and they're hiring workers according to this report. And so it appears that employers and businesses believe that Trump is right.
That's the structural shift Navarro has been describing. Businesses are not reacting to simply a quarter. They're making bets on a new American economy. And President Trump put his own exclamation point on it. Not only were the jobs numbers great yesterday, 178,000 new jobs, but the trade deficit was down 55%, the biggest drop in history. Thank you, Mr. Tariff. Now, it's true. Many Americans don't yet feel this personally, and the media is counting on that. But ask yourself this question: why don't you feel it? Because for 50 years, the British free trade system stripped out the productive economy that would let you feel it. At one time, 31% of our jobs were directly in manufacturing. Now it's only 8%. And those were the jobs where one income could raise a family. And as Secretary of State Rubio said, it was a conscious policy to deindustrialize. President Trump has declared war on that system. And like the American Revolutionary War, it's going to take time to secure our independence. But the fight has begun, and we are rebuilding our productive capacity and producing things again, not just consuming them. A nation of consumers is an economic colony. A nation of producers is sovereign. And that fight between the British system and the American system has been raging for over 250 years. That's the battlefield, not today's price at the pump. And that's exactly the fight Promethean Action has been covering for decades. This didn't start with Liberation Day, and it won't end with one jobs report. If you understand the battlefield, you'll understand why Donald Trump terrifies them. And I want you to stay on the right side of this fight. So subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. The link is in the description. Plus, the battle lines are also being clarified on the strategic side. Since the end of World War II, the British Empire has told us who our friends and our enemies are. The free world versus communism, the West versus Islamic extremism. Never mind that along the way, they had a big hand in creating those enemy ideologies. The result of that is we've ended up fighting to keep their world intact. One of the key neoconservative architects of that world and of the last 35 years of perpetual war in the Mideast just admitted it. Robert Kagan, who happens to be married to Victoria Nuland, herself an architect of the Ukraine crisis, confessed in The Atlantic this week in the article that was headlined, "America is now a rogue superpower." Here's what Kagan said. The Trump administration, however, has turned America's long-standing hierarchy of interests upside down. For 8 decades, Americans were deeply involved in the greater Middle East, not because the region was intrinsically a vital national security interest, but as part of a broader global commitment to the alliances and freedom of navigation that undergirded the American-led liberal world order. Well, it wasn't American-led, but did you catch that? We weren't fighting for American interests. We were fighting for the liberal world order, the empire's management architecture. Kagan said that in his own words. So when Donald Trump breaks from that and fights for American and not imperial interests, well, that's what Kagan calls going rogue. And this week, Trump told the press exactly what's going rogue in practice in reference to NATO. Here's how the BBC covered it. Asked by Britain's Telegraph newspaper if he is reconsidering U.S. membership of NATO, he said, "Oh, yes, I would say it's beyond reconsideration. I just think it should be automatic." And then the BBC let it all hang out by declaring Trump's invective underlines again his misunderstanding of how this 32-member alliance works. Well, Donald Trump understands exactly how it works. And the response of NATO over the past month has given him the political capital he needs to end the liberal world order. Kagan said it himself. For 80 years, America was in the Mideast not for our security, but to enforce the liberal world order. NATO was the institutional architecture of that enforcement. And when Trump refused to treat it as automatic, when he asked what's in it for America, the alliance is crumbling. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a sovereign nation asking a sovereign question for the first time in 80 years. So the old architecture is fracturing. The question is what's being put in its place. The answer is already visible, if you know where to look. David Rennie, who's the Economist's geopolitical editor, made a confession similar to Kagan's in a discussion where he described how China looks at Donald Trump.
I listened to them tracking Trump since the first term when I was in Beijing and then through into the second term. They currently think of him as you say, chaotic and difficult to deal with, but also a tremendous opportunity because they say, and I do believe them because I always, the more cynical they are, the more truthful I think they're being because they are exceedingly cynical, is he is the least hawkish person in Washington they know. He is more willing to let China buy high-end American chips, to invest in America, that his transactional, selfish, me-first instincts are an opportunity for China. One of the things we heard was, if this Iran war weakens him too much, that's actually bad for us. Because if he's really weak in Washington, then that foreign policy blob, the kind of the hawks waiting in the wings, they get maybe more power. So they like dealing with this chaotic, selfish, transactional, not very hawkish Donald Trump.
Think about that. The Economist, which is the mouthpiece for the City of London, is admitting that China understands and welcomes what they fear. China would rather deal with a strong, sovereign, transactional America than with the, quote, foreign policy blob, the hawks waiting in the wings. And both China and Russia are busy carrying out back-channel discussions through Pakistan and other Middle Eastern countries to bring the Iran conflict to an end. Russian President Vladimir Putin met with the Egyptian foreign minister in the Kremlin this week and made a very measured comment. Naturally, the situation in the region remains a shared concern. We all hope the ongoing conflict will be promptly resolved. As you know, President Trump also addressed this issue yesterday. Let me reiterate that we are prepared to make every effort to stabilize the situation and, as they say in such cases, return it to normal. Not exactly a denunciation of the United States. But here's where it gets more interesting. Russia is engaged in the same kind of transactional policy centered on economic development, which characterizes Trump's policies. TASS said that Putin is also discussing creating a grain and energy hub in Egypt. And the energy part of this deal with Egypt includes nuclear power, not unlike what the U.S. is doing with some Gulf states. This is not chaos. This is what a world of sovereign nations looks like when the imperial management layer is removed. Multiple powers pursuing their own interests, making deals based on what actually serves their nations rather than what serves Kagan's liberal world order. So where does that put us? 1 year ago, the empire told you that tariffs would be a catastrophe. Here we are today with our manufacturing base reawakening, the composition of our labor force changing, and the trade deficit down dramatically. 1 year ago, membership in NATO was inviolate. The special relation with the UK was intact. And today, Kagan is declaring that the United States has gone rogue from that liberal world order. Well, what they call rogue, we call independence. And here we are 3 months from the 250th anniversary of our independence from that very empire whose system Trump is now challenging. And we are less than 9 months from the vital midterm elections, which will determine whether the president can fully reassert our independence. If you want to be equipped to be part of that fight, Go to our website and join Promethean Action as a supporting member or contributor. Because, like the American Revolution, this isn't going to be won in a couple of months. This has been your Saturday Brief. Thanks for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at Promethean.
All right, we are back. We are back. Let's see. So what's your thoughts on that? Leave it in the comment section. And give me 1 second. Let's see here. All right. So let me know. Pull the screen back down. Here we go. We back. So, very interesting take. Let me know what you think. Leave it in the comments, and we'll kind of get back on it, when I go back over the comments or whatever. But thank you for joining us for the show, Brother Hill Show. And I hope that was able to provide you a different angle. That was the point. So we'll have more on this. We'll follow back up with some more interesting topics and different viewpoints, and try to get, not try to get, but to continue to bring some different elements to the game. I listen to a lot of podcasters all day, and I want to continue to provide some unique material and different perspectives to give us a holistic viewpoint. But have a productive day on this wonderful Monday here in America, and wherever you at all around the world. We appreciate you. But have a very productive and safe day. And we send our prayers to everybody as we all continue to push for peace and stability, not just here at home, but all over the world. That being said, peace.